I'm going to hand over to Jodi to read a little, and then we'll talk a little more about the novel. Jodi.
So this section is actually in the historical section. It's narrated by Minka, who is the main character, Sage's grandmother, back when she was a teenager. And in the part I'm reading to you from, she has recently arrived at Auschwitz, and she's been separated from her father, and she and her best friend have just been put to work. Daria and I were lucky because we had been assigned to Canada. It was an area where the belongings that had come in on the trains were sorted. The valuables were tallied and given to the guards, who brought them to the SS officer in charge of getting them to Berlin. The clothing went somewhere else. And then there were the items no one needed: eyeglasses, prosthetic limbs, photographs. These were to be destroyed. The reason it was nicknamed Canada was because we imagined that country as the land of plenty. In Canada, if a guard was looking the other way, it was possible to steal an extra pair of gloves, underwear, a hat. The SS officer in charge of Canada spent a portion of the day weaving among us to make sure we did not steal. He was a slight man, not much taller than I was. I had seen him drag outside a prisoner who had hidden a gold candlestick up the sleeve of her jacket. Although we didn't see the beating, we could hear it. The prisoner was left unconscious in front of the barracks. The officer returned to walk through the aisles where we worked with a nauseated look on his face. It made him seem human. And if he was human, how could he do this to us? Secretly, when he passed by, I thought of him as Herr Dybbuk, a human man too weak to force out the evil that had taken up residence in him. There was always a little ripple of awareness when Herr Dybbuk arrived or departed, as if his presence was an electric shock. Even though I didn't turn around to watch, I could hear him approaching with another SS officer. They were speaking, and I eavesdropped on their German conversation as I ripped open a ham. So then the beer hall? At 8. You won't tell me you're too busy again. I'm beginning to think you're avoiding your own brother. Over my shoulder, I peeked. I'll be there, Herr Dybbuk vowed. He was talking to the SS officer who oversaw Appel, the man in charge of the women's camp, the one with the tremor in his hand, the one who was not inhabited by an evil spirit. He was just evil, period. He ran hot and cold when it came to overseeing Appel. Either he seemed bored and the count went quickly, or he was on a rampage and took his fury out on us. Just that morning, he had raised his pistol and shot a girl who was too weak to stand upright. When the girl beside her jumped in response, he shot her too. These officers were related. The guard who was watching me sift through the suitcases shouted at me to get to work, so I reached into the pile that never seemed to get any smaller and pulled out a leather valise. This one I recognized. Inside were the candlesticks that had come from my grandmother, wrapped carefully in my father's tallis. Beneath that were his socks, his undershorts, a sweater my mother had knit for him. He told me once he hated it, that the sleeves were too long and the wool too itchy, but she had gone to so much trouble. How could he not pretend that he loved it more than anything? I couldn't catch my breath. I had not believed my father was truly dead until I opened this suitcase. With shaking hands, I lifted the sweater. This sleeve was the one my mother had been working on when my sister fell down and hit her head on the corner of the piano bench and needed stitches. This hemline she had measured against my father's midsection, joking out loud that she had not meant to marry such a gorilla of a man. Wiping my eyes, I started to pull the hem of the sweater. I rolled the yarn up around my arm like a bandage, a tourniquet for a soul that was bleeding out. The guard closest to me approached, screaming, jerking his gun at my face. Do it, I thought. I kept pulling on the yarn until it lay in a nest around me. Somewhere Daria was watching, too afraid for her own welfare to tell me to stop, but I couldn't. I was unraveling too. The commotion attracted the other guards. When one leaned down to grab the candlesticks, I snatched them in one hand and took the scissors I'd used to cut up fur coats, pressing the blade against my throat. The guard laughed. The SS officer in charge of Canada pushed through the crowd. Wem gehört dieser Koffer? To whom does this suitcase belong? Meinem Vater, I murmured. He looked at me for a long moment, then turned to the other guards and shouted at them to stop staring. Get back to work, he said, and a moment later, he was gone.